Hi, I'm Dan, this is our midlife crisis motorcyclist, and this is the Triumph Daytona 660. But then you knew that, didn't you? Because I've already ridden it on the channel and it's now been out for a little while. Since then though, I've ridden quite a few more bikes and my horizons have somewhat broadened. So I wanted to return to it and ask the question, is this really a Daytona that lives up to that esteemed badge and all those amazing sports bikes Triumph has used it on in the past? Or is it just a Trident 660 in a tracksuit? Wait, isn't that what we were asking when the bike first came out? Yeah, I think it is, but I was interested because out of the blue, Triumph offered me some time on the Daytona, perhaps in the hope that I would find something nice to say about it, which suggests to me that perhaps people haven't bought into this idea that it is a true Daytona, or maybe they're just not buying it at all. Now, I should point out that I'm not here to tell you that it's wonderful in exchange for a fat brown envelope. This is not paid for content or advertorial, but I was interested to get back on the Daytona, having ridden a lot of its key competitors in this new school sports bike class in which it operates. Now, we've been over this before on the channel, but just to reiterate, these are bikes in this new kind of sub 10 grand class. They've all got less than 100 horsepower, so they can be run in restricted A2 licence form for younger riders, and they're designed to appeal to a new generation of sports bike riders who, perhaps coming from sporty nakeds, things like that, they've never ridden a bike with a fairing before, they're looking for something relatively affordable, accessible, not as perhaps hardcore as a proper supersports like a Honda CBR 600 RR or something like that. Now, to those ends, I've ridden the Yamaha R7, the Honda CBR 650R, the Suzuki GSX-8R, and you can see videos to all those in the links in the description below. There's also bikes like the Aprilia RS 660, which is a little more expensive and hardcore, and the Kawasaki Ninja 650, which is a little slower, let's say. As well as that, there's the point that when I first rode the Daytona, I'd never ridden a sports bike of any description at all, so I didn't really have any frame of reference. Since then, I've also ridden some more serious bikes like the Ducati Panigale V2, the Yamaha R9 that you might have seen me riding on the channel recently. So yes, my horizons have broadened somewhat since then. Now, I'm not claiming to be any kind of expert, I'm not a riding god, I'm just your average steady Eddie, but yes, hopefully I've got a bit more context to try and understand this bike. Will I be as impressed as I was when I first rode it and I didn't know any different, or indeed better? Let's go for a ride and find out. Right, so back on the Daytona, and I'm really interested to see how this feels, given that when I first rode it, I think it was my second ever press launch. I'd never ridden a sports bike, and since then I've been lucky enough to ride all sorts of different bikes, different formats, different engines, different power outputs, all sorts. So I'm very interested to see how my changing perspective alters my view of the bike. So let's just go back to how I felt when I first got on it, on some very sunny Spanish roads. So a bit different today, but it's a British bike, so let's ride it in some British weather and some British roads. But yeah, when I first got onto it, I was really struck by how weird it felt, how low the front was, how narrow the bars were, how high my feet were. It all felt very alien to me, but I quickly adjusted to it. I got used to it, and I really enjoyed riding it. And probably in that moment I was exactly the target audience. First time sports bike rider, relatively inexperienced, just finding my feet on this style of bike. So, and that's exactly the target audience that Triumph is going for with this bike. So that was then. This is now. Before we get into that, let's just recap what we've got. So 666cc engine, 95 horsepower, 67 or 69 newton meters of torque, I can't quite remember, but it's one of the more powerful engines in this class of new school sports bikes. And it's based on the Trident and Tiger Sport platform, which
I now know a lot better. But the engine actually, if I remember from the press briefings, actually had quite a bit of work done to it over those other bikes. So it's got different airbox, bigger exhaust valves, different internals, different gearing, I think. So there's quite a few changes over that engine that I know from the Trident and Tiger Sport, which you'd have seen me ride on the channel previously. So that adds some weight to the idea that this is a genuinely sportier bike than the ones it shares bits with. But how does it compare with the other bikes in this category from memory? Well, the Suzuki GSX-8R, I recall, had a pretty similar riding position, so relatively upright with its sort of pseudo clip-ons. That was a parallel twin, super grunty and lots of fun. I enjoyed that bike a lot. The Honda CBR 650R, well, that's the bike that Triumph seemingly benchmarked this one against in terms of its power output, geometry and all that kind of stuff. So that one was really interesting, and I loved the Honda engine. It was the first time I'd ridden a proper 4-cylinder screamer, and that gives the Honda a real USP, and a very Honda one as well. Again, in terms of the riding position and things like that, pretty comfortable and easy to get along with. But I think probably the Honda and the Triumph are the closest in spirit. The Yamaha R7, well, as I've come to learn from Yamaha, that is the lightest, the most extreme, the pointiest of this group, and it definitely delivered what I imagined to be a proper sports bike riding experience. Certainly the riding position was the most focused, it felt the most angry, and although it's down on power quite a bit compared with some of the other bikes in the category, it was the spikiest, the angriest, and that's something that I've felt in the R9 that I've ridden subsequently. So I've since come to understand that that's kind of the way Yamaha does things. So yeah, on the spectrum, the R7's probably the sportiest. The Suzuki's a great all-rounder with a really characterful engine, and then the Honda and the Triumph share that kind of mix of sophistication and grunt. But it's interesting that this riding position that felt so extreme when I first got on it now feels relatively upright and safe. It's certainly not, you know, kind of head down, bum in the air sports bike, which is weird because when you park it up and look at it, it looks like a sports bike. Yeah, it presents as one, but riding it, it almost feels closer to a Tiger Sport 660 in some ways. So the question, I guess, hanging over it is, does it have enough bandwidth over the Tiger Sports to really set itself apart and count as a proper sports bike? Well, I've got some time with the bike to hopefully explore that, and hopefully I'll get to do so on some drier roads as well, so stick with me and let's find out.
So I started out the video asking, is this a true Daytona and worthy of the name? And well, I still can't tell you because I've never ridden any of the previous Daytonas, have I still? So maybe that's something to address before the bike goes back, so we can finally put that one to bed. But certainly from my perspective, this bike is very interesting and nails the brief that I think Triumph has laid out for it in terms of the new audience that it's playing to, that being folk like myself who perhaps don't have any history of riding sports bikes. You know, we didn't graduate from 125s, 250s, 400s, super sports, litre bikes. We don't have that background of track days and all that kind of thing. We just come at it as fairly new riders, limited experience, perhaps having ridden roadsters or nakeds or things like that. And this is the first sort of fared sports bike type machine that we'd consider. And for people like us, the new Daytona really, as I say, absolutely nails the brief. It is characterful, it's got a great engine, it's got torque and revs, it's got enough performance to excite you without so much that it terrifies you. The riding position is relatively accommodating for a sports bike. It's not too heavy on the wrists or anything like that. You know, I think you could ride it every day, ride it for decent distances and all that kind of thing. And it certainly gives a sense of a sports bike for people who perhaps haven't ridden one or owned one before. The problem being that those very qualities are exactly the sort of thing that are going to annoy the people who do have memories of previous Daytonas and celebrate that name for standing for a much more hardcore lineage of bikes that really do live up to that sports bike billing. So the problem Triumph might have is that if it's not attracting those new riders and it's alienating its traditional customer base, then perhaps there's kind of falling in between. But certainly in the class of these kind of new school sports bikes, I think this is one of the really appealing options, given that triple engine, given it looks great, it's priced competitively, all that kind of stuff. So in terms of how it sits in this new sports bike world, I think it deserves to be a success. Whether it lives up to that reputation or trashes it is another matter, something we'll have to talk about. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments thread below, so let's have a chat about it. Is it a real Daytona? Does it trash the legacy? Is it a new school sports bike for a new school of rider? So yeah, let's have a chat about that. Now, I'm going to be running a bike for a little bit as well, so I'll do another video on it down the line. So also, if you've got any questions about the bike or things you want me to try out in the second video, then just let me know in the comments thread and I'll see about that in the next video. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, please hit like. If you're not a subscriber to the channel already, please sign up, that would be great. And in the meantime, I'll say goodbye, thanks for watching and ride safe.